Hi there, my name is Jeremiah Gibson. I am the Executive Director of the New England Association for Family and Systemic Therapy. And this is the second part of our 12-part series called Equity in the Agency Experience. And last month, we had a few folks talk about an introductory process to the agency experience, some of the challenges that kind of happen over the larger process, and also some of the strengths that happen over the larger process of an agency experience. And one of the things that we wanted to do with this 12-part series is to share the information and experiences of agency workers, and do this in more of kind of a long-form interview process where the stories, the experiences, the ideas can then be shared amongst our own psychotherapy community within EFAST, and also hopefully with larger systems as well, with folks in agency systems, with folks in political systems. As ideally, we would like, our ultimate goal is to create systems of justice, to create systems of equity for agency employees, because the experiences that agency employees have really inform the future of psychotherapy from my perspective. If folks stay in agencies for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, the ways that relationships with recipients of mental health services from community mental health centers, and also if folks choose to leave agencies, that the practice of psychotherapy in other settings can be preserved, can be strengthened, so that in 10 to 20 years, as the need for psychotherapy increases, particularly following the pandemic, we can have a quality workforce. And have a workforce that isn't burnt out, and that also has a workforce that has the professional development needs that they have. So today I'm joined by, how many panelists do I have? I'm joined by 6 panelists here. And what I want to do is I want to introduce and name each of them. And when I call you by name, if you could just say where you work and how long you've been in the system. We have 4 folks who work in agencies, and also on this panel are 2 professors at a local university. So I'll start with the agency workers. And Isabel, if we could start with you.
Hi, I work at Spectrum Health Systems, and I've been there for just about 3 years. So
Perfect. And let's go to Jitsine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jitsine Felix, and I work at Rediscovery House, which is under Justice Resource Institute, and I'm shy away from hitting my 1-year anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Let's go with Rosanna.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rosanna Martinez, and I work for the for Justice Resource Institute, but specifically with Children's Friends and Family Services.
Yeah, great. Welcome. And then Cynthia.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Lai. I work for the early psychosis team at JRI on the Flex team, and I've been there just shy of 2 years, I think.
Great, welcome. And we're also excited to be joined by 2 university professors, also editors on the New England Journal of Relational and Systemic Practice. Dr. David Haddad. David, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, everybody. As Jeremiah said, I teach at William James, but I also had about 30 years experience working in community mental health settings, and have always kind of been in public practice, that intersection of public and private practice. So I appreciate this conversation today.
Yeah, great. And Jackie Gagliardi.
Hi, everybody. I am the director of the Couple and Family Therapy Program at William James. I have been in practice for 35 years and was also in community mental health.
Yeah. So one of the things that we want to talk about today is the developmental needs. So by developmental needs, I mean professional needs, emotional needs, financial needs, socioeconomic needs of of newer therapists and thinking about the experiences of folks who have just left the university and are moving into the agency experience. I don't have good data on this. I will say a large percentage of agency workers have just recently in the last 2 to 3 years left the graduate school. If someone has a statistic on what the actual percentage is and can throw me in that chat, that would be fantastic. I will communicate that with the group. But to the 4 agency workers, one of the things that I'm curious about is when you think about the first 3 to 6 months of your experience in the agency, what were some of the professional needs that you had, regardless of whether or not you got them met? That's a different conversation. But what were some of the professional needs that each of you had? Jadine, go for it.
Yeah, I'll start. I think what was really important for me was supervision being set in stone, like right when I started, like my first day. I think I had my first official supervision with a supervisor here at the site that I work with, but also I think within the next week, I was already set up with my supervisor for my clinical hours. And so I thought that was something that attracted me to the position itself, because I didn't have to go outsource a supervisor for my licensing hours. But it was helpful because both supervisors at the same time were working with me throughout my transition into the professional world. And so I was able to process as I was going through that first like 2 to 3 months. And having that established already was super beneficial for me, because I didn't realize how much I needed it until like the second month. And I was like, I don't know what boundaries are. I don't know how to do this. Help me out. So having those already set in stone for me created a relationship where I could bring those things up as I was learning, as I was trying to, create my professional style and create professional relationships with others. So that was super helpful.
Thanks for sharing that, Jadine. Rosanna, go for it.
For me, when I started, I feel like I needed a lot of guidelines, in sense of like, I needed to know what was happening. I needed to feel like I knew what the steps were. But I think that that's, again, a preference for me, just because I'm so organized and I'm detail oriented. I needed to feel like, it's because, going from grad school to a job in the field, it needs to feel like I'm stepping on something secure. And I feel like even just like a set of steps of what's going to happen next felt like gave me the illusion of stability and me confidence to know what's going to happen next.
So guidelines, almost a roadmap for
Exactly,
what to
yes.
expect in the first 6 months, 12 months. Yeah. Yeah, good feedback. Other folks, Cynthia, go for it.
I'm actually just going to add that I think it was really important for me, and one of my needs was to have tools. I think when you're sort of in grad school, there's sort of like, are just like, have at it. And you have lots of different feedback, but when you're out in the field, there's sort of, especially like during the beginning of the pandemic, going into sort of agency work felt like a little like a free-for-all, where you experience some of the disorganization that is just part of the system. And so I think what was really important is having tools to practice that maybe that I really hadn't been able to practice in grad school, given sort of the limited sort of setting that you're in, like out in the real world.
Cynthia, I'm curious if you could distinguish between tools and the kind of the guideline roadmap piece that Rosanna's talking about.
Yeah, I'm thinking more like therapeutic tools.
Okay.
So like things to actually practice and do in session. Guidelines and sort of like having some guidance was also a need of mine.
Okay, no, that's a helpful distinction between like what the process is to be expected moving forward as much as we can, and like specific strategies to engage in a clinical level, which seems to be, Cynthia, more of what you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah. Isabel, what about for you? What some
I was
needs?
gonna say, kind of going off of like the supervision, and I mean, I agree with all of what everybody else has said. I definitely think that that was necessary for me. But also in addition to just like having a supervisor, also like being directed into other relationships with other people in similar roles as me that I can go to, that I feel comfortable with, that I can, you know, ask for advice. Sometimes my supervisor just isn't available at that time. So definitely like
Yeah,
a good relationship with coworkers.
great. Yeah. So we want to talk about what's working in the system, and each of the answers that y'all shared, and also that other people shared. I'm curious if y'all could talk about experiences that you've had in the agency where those needs were met. Needs of supervision, effective supervision, needs of guidelines, therapeutic tools, relationships with other folks. Jetsine, go for it.
Yeah. So I'm I'm going through it because I'm trying to not answer what needs were not met as I'm talking about what needs were met.
We'll get there.
Yeah, definitely. So I think what was unique about JRI was that they set me up with group supervision, which was similar to what Isabel was saying, with the fact that there were people who were in the same, you know, space as me, not necessarily just starting, but on the same track and, you know, working towards their licensing hours, that I was able to meet and connect with via Zoom. And then I was also, I think this by my third month, we have a futures group, which is like they put a bunch of you know, individuals throughout the company, the agency, in a group and kind of work on that professional development. And it's highlighting future leaders within JRI. And so that was nice because I was able to create those connections outside of, you know, Rediscovery, the place that I'm in, and get to know what other agencies are doing, get to know and also appreciate some things that I realized I was getting that some other people are not getting. And so I think that was helpful because it did not only meet the need of community within JRI, but also that supervision, that connection, that networking aspect of professional development that in graduate school I was able to do, but I was always curious on how do I do that within an agency? How do I network and create connections within an agency? And how does my supervisor, you know, help me create that connection and help foster that desire to create networks? And so I was able to do that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jitsine. Yeah. Rosanna, go for it.
I think following what Justine said, what is the sense of community? I think I started pre-pandemic. I believe, a year before the pandemic hit. And the first thing that I do remember after like being settled, after trainings, was the community that was established within the pod area. So in the division that I'm in, we share common spaces, or we used to share common spaces with other clinicians, and just the give and take of like maybe getting out of a session and feeling uncertain or ungrounded, just having somebody right in front of you or right next to you who's writing notes that can just debrief with you, you know, in a confidential way. But just that sense of like somebody's there with you, holding your hand in a sense, I think was very, very nice for me.
Yeah, yeah, great. Yeah, other folks. Cynthia, go for it.
So I've been reflecting on the question, and I really just have like, a lot of my needs were met, you know, were met sort of by my supervisor. And I should say supervisors because I had one originally had requested another one because I wanted those tools and more than just sort of like a reflection sort of supervision. And that person sort of, you know, even when I had questions, even when I wanted other things to sort of be included in the job, you know, that was a person who was totally invested in me and just sort of like went for it and gave me those resources. I think the other sort of like where else I sought it and sort of like I got my needs met were also clinicians on my specific team. They were doing so, you know, I'm on a specialty team and it can be quite isolating to go out into the community and not have an office to come back to. And so being able to connect with them, even just by text, being like, oh my gosh, like this happened, was, you know, just another way to sort of, yeah, get some of those. And I think others have talked about this, but get that feedback of like, oh yeah, like me too.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Other thoughts? And David, Jackie, as y'all are, go for it, David.
Well, I thought of maybe we were thinking about like how important it is for, you know, in sort of school for when students are leaving to be kind of for us to be talking about when they're going to agencies, asking them about their supervisory, what they have to offer and what kind of supervision should they expect, you know, that those kind of things, and creating these kind of relationships. You know, how do those things happen? You know, that how do they foster that? I was really happy to hear what Judson talked about how JRI kind of created this space for that. That seems very exciting. But I think just getting students to think about when you're interviewing, it's not just what the agencies get from you. It's like, what can the agencies give you? What makes it attractive? This is what we have to offer. We really want you. This is what we're going to give you.
Right. And David, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about my own experience transitioning from college to the agency world. And for me, that was a really, really hard transition. I had been in a cohort model. I had 18 other students that I had taken classes with. We took all the classes together, and the model was like steeped in systems work and systems theory. And so transitioning from my graduate school in Texas to my agency in New England, like for me, that was the biggest culture shock. And the culture shock was not just recognizing that I didn't have that cohort model anymore, but that the perspective of the agency was completely different from the perspective of the graduate school. Whereas where the agency is interested, at least the agency that I worked at was interested in, and we'll talk about this next month, a productivity model where my success is rooted in like how many clients that I can see. My graduate experience was rooted in like understanding and really practicing and understanding the theories, the psychotherapy theories, and figuring out how to like incorporate those, include those. That transition for me was really, really hard. And I'm curious for the folks on the panel, to the agency workers, if y'all could describe a little bit more about what your transitions from the graduate school model to the agency model is. And then also David and Jackie, I'm curious as professors, and Frank Gomez is another person that's here that also teaches at a university. I'm curious about feedback from the three of you about what agencies might be able to do to help guide that transition a little bit more effectively.
Well, I think they have orientations. And so I think that's probably helpful. I think in terms of, for example, what we do at William James is actually keep in touch with our alum. And they can come back anytime and speak with us about any issues that they might have in experiences, good or challenging.
But I think the one other thing I would add is sort of the difference between teaching psychopathology in graduate school using the DSM and then being in the world where you're actually kind of applying that. It's not so clean. It's much more kind of messy. And so it requires a lot more kind of dialogue, right, to find the place that really kind of fits how it's used, how it's applied in each program, the different set of issues, how does it serve the client? So I think those are rich conversations. And we learn when students go into the field and they give us feedback and say, oh, I wasn't prepared for X. So that's why these kind of conversations are so important for us, because we hear, oh, we can incorporate this kind of feedback into our kind of curriculum.
Go for it, Jadzine, and then Frank.
Yeah, I really liked what Dr. David had mentioned, because I think I came in fresh, like I know the DSM, and then I think trying to apply it, like you said, it wasn't clean at all. So I think there were a lot of moments where I thought that, okay, since it's not applying clean in the way that I thought it was going to do in graduate school, then I'm not doing it right, or I'm not using the tool the way it should be used. And so what I really appreciated about the place that I worked with was every Wednesday we had like clinical meetings where it was just clinicians and our clinical director and our interns kind of going through and processing, hey, this is how this diagnosis looks like or presents in our population that we work with. This is how, you know, this tool is used with the population that we work with. Every population is going to look different. So we had every Wednesday up until now, we've been able to almost do that continued teaching for me, which was really beneficial because there were some diagnoses that we didn't necessarily fully dive into in graduate school that I was able to talk about. I was able to learn how to actually apply and how to use it as a tool, and why our agency specifically uses the DSM, because it's different throughout different agencies. And how it applies to, you know, when we're applying for DMH housing or Department of Mental Health housing for our youth, or developmental disabled services for our youth, and how we use it as a tool. So I think overall having a space where we did that continuing education and relevant stuff that came up for our youth that we processed, and that I think that was much needed, because it was a little rocky for me because I was in the middle of the pandemic and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to be a clinician while I'm trying to process the pandemic myself. And having there were times where these clinical meetings felt like a classroom for me. And I didn't realize how safe I felt in that moment, because I was like, okay, I know how to do school still. Not clinical stuff yet, but I still know how to do school. So let's do that. And so I think that was helpful because it just connected everything for me. And now I'm confident saying I can do school and be a clinician at the same time.
Jadzine, I love the way that you described that transition and gave some language for that. And curious about others' feedback about this. Frank, what were you going to have?
I was just going to say, I think as a teacher, I think sometimes it's important to allow those downtimes for questions of realistic scenarios that students are going through in their work with families or youth. That has been, I think, ideal in conceptualizing some of the things that we're talking in the classroom. Something that I benefited from as a student. I think I think has been important in that aspect of my work, but also I think in the adverse, in actually doing work in the community, implementing specific in clinical supervision, things that you can sort of bring to the families from those teachings that you're actively working on has been of benefit as well in my experience.
Yeah. Shago has a question. Go for it.
Hi, I'm Jaro. I'm a clinician. I am also a person of color supervisor. I've been supervising supervisees working at different agencies for about 10 years. And I want to put one element I think it's still missing, and it's very important in our education and practice, that is bringing supporting our graduate students and practitioner to develop this anti-racism practice, that this developing, viewing oneself from a multi-dimensional lenses. I think to our grad schools, majority of them are still failing education because we are showing white families, Michael White treating white families. We're showing this video practice are all white families, white therapists, and treating very articulate teenager struggle with depression. And so really it's supporting clinicians who just graduate, developing this anti-racism practice. And agencies are also feeling, because the agency now doing, I have one supervisor share her experience after George Floyd's death, that agency say, oh, we want to support Black Lives Matters. So agency doing the, okay, this week we will have a clinician present how to work with Asian families, how to work. So it's still this like a category, how to work with African American, but like the education and supervisors' ability to have the conversation about, okay, do assessment in a way to explore families or individuals. Have you been hurt or treated unfairly due to your race? And also your family relationship in the society, in the neighborhood, that in this explore racial trauma and how do we inform, how do we do trauma inform? Also have the component, how do we do racial informed trauma work? So I just want to put it out there. And other components, I think developmentally also important is case conceptualization work and help clinician, newer clinician, how to track progress, and also their organization skills in terms of time management, paperwork management. Yeah.
Well, one of the things, and Chago, I'm so glad that you brought up the piece about anti-racism development, and I would expand that to intersectionality and anti-oppression, because from my perspective, we can't do anti-racism work without doing anti-ageism work, without exploring class, without exploring gender, orientation, all those things as well. And I think that to throw back then to the panel, I'm curious about what are ways that you experience, agencies engaging effectively or less effectively in that process, particularly as you engage in a very wide range of clientele across families, across classes, across ages. So I hope that's an okay way to summarize, Chago, that your point that you made and transform it into a question. So yeah, curious about other thoughts on the panel.
So I think in academia, we do, especially like at William James, is that, one of our utmost goals is to train people to be culturally competent and sensitive. And I think that does happen, that we show videos, we have role plays of people from different cultures. But I'm wondering what happens in agencies, and if supervisors who have been supervising for a long time, who haven't had the privilege of having that kind of education, fall short because they themselves have not had that type of an education.
I will say, I will say in my experience, JRI's approached this in two ways. One is that I'm going to say it's really important for sort of a person's supervisor to not be shying away from conversations like those and just say it how it is. Because I think it sort of opens doors for more conversations and sort of like, and it goes into your therapeutic work and systems work, whether or not you like it or not. I think the other thing that JRI has been trying to do, and I don't know how successful they've been, to be quite honest, but it's sort of like creating different affinity groups and different groups where, you know, we are trying to have these conversations and accepting that it is uncomfortable, and providing guidelines for those. And I do appreciate sort of the approach for that.
Yeah. Go for it, Isabel.
I would definitely agree with Cynthia, that I think the agency I work for definitely like just being able to talk to your supervisor about those things. Like I've been lucky enough to have that, but also I think the agency as a whole should be able to educate more frequently on topics. Like I don't know if anyone else's agency has like the videos, and I think we do like one training video of like cultural competence. So like more of education, working with different races, different ages, different classes, but also in addition, I think something that would be more beneficial to me is having more clinicians in the agency that speak more than just English, because obviously if you're not having people apply for the job, you can't really hire them. But looking at the agency, you know, like can look into why that might be, why people who speak Spanish aren't applying for jobs, and kind of changing maybe the approach to that. Because, you know, if I get a client that doesn't speak Spanish, how can I provide good therapy? So that's something as well.
Well, Isabel, just to add to that, and then David, I want to turn this over to you. I'm wondering also if agencies might be able to provide training in languages. What it might be like to have agencies fund Spanish training programs, Mandarin training programs, Russian training programs, kind of based on wherever they are in the community, at least to have enough like conversational language. Maybe not necessarily enough to do therapy, because obviously fluency takes a pretty extensive process, but at least enough to know. You know, to know some of the common phrases, common questions that might respect and honor some of the programs. David, and then I want to ask you, Cynthia, to talk about the comment that you sent. But David, you're muted. Go for it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. It just seems that one of the complications that strikes me is that once a person gets a diagnosis, same thing in graduate school, it's like we somehow lose the person. And even though there is I think Chow Zhou's, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, that so reminded me that it's like even though we're supposed to be kind of, our clients are embedded in a system, but we don't often take that system's view. We're not always looking at how does the system kind of create the symptoms that we're seeing. An individual diagnosis focuses on the individual, but really, I think it's systemic. And that's one of the challenges that I think clinicians face and agencies face. And that as teachers, how do we help students to think beyond like the anti-DSM? Like the DSM isn't the truth with a capital T. It's like one word, one vision, but it has its flaws, lots of flaws. And so I think we have to be able to represent that side of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Cynthia, you had messaged me something. I'm wondering if you could share it with the group.
Oh, sure. So I was actually just commenting that, so Boston College actually does this in terms of the, I'm trying to remember, it's the Latinx Leadership Initiative, where they have alumni as supervisors and advisors who are, you know, create this cohort and are culturally and language-wise like congruent with the people that they take in. I also want to comment that like I know Frank like does trauma-informed trainings or trauma trainings in Spanish, and I think it's called like La Comunidad, and so you know I think there are places where this is happening, but I'm sure Frank could comment more about how that's going.
It's going. I think that something like that, I think it's very important. And one of the main things that we hear from clinicians is we don't have enough trainings in the language that we're providing services. And beyond that, we don't have a community to share our experiences around this. And so I think attempts to do so, like the trauma training in Spanish, it's sort of an important thing. And beyond that, I think trainings like that might yield supervisors that speak Spanish, and so that there's sort of a couple of layers of support for individuals that are just starting and are doing that type of work.
Yeah. As I'm listening to this conversation, one of the key features is like, well, who's going to pull some of this off? If we're talking about like some of the systems that we want to build, systems around continuing education, systems that provide culturally competent, anti-racist, anti-oppressive practices, it seems that the supervisors then play really, really key roles in overseeing that process in the agency world. And I'm curious if the panel could talk a little bit more about some of the specific things that they might need or want from supervisors in order to more effectively provide some of that guidance, training, wisdom, and also maybe some ways that the agencies can support the supervisors too. Judson, go for it.
Yeah, I'll start because I've actually just switched over supervisors because the supervisor I had when I first started transitioned into another position. And I've been fortunate / unfortunate to experience two different supervision styles that as I'm hearing everybody, I'm like, oh, that really impacted me more than I thought. And so my first supervisor had experience as a teacher. And so she was able to bring a lot of reflection points for me, processing points for me, but also allowed me to process as a clinician of color in that space where I felt safe enough with a white clinician in order to do that work, right? And it comes from her experience and what she has experienced, what she went through, what she saw, and, you know, being in the agency for 5 years and then teaching for, you know, longer than that. Then transitioning to a very young supervisor who is learning as I'm going, right? I'm her official first supervisee. And what I'm seeing is that there are a lot of times where I'm realizing I need connections, I need resources, right? When I say, hey, I'm interested in, you know, what it would look like if I spoke Creole to this one youth who also speaks Haitian Creole, how do I go about that, right? And so having a supervisor who's able to take it from our supervision and then, okay, what resources can I connect her with? What work can I connect her with, right? For example, a panel like this, right? It was my licensing supervisor that connected me to this panel, right? And because she has that experience and that ability to, you know, connect me to something beyond what she's able to do for me and what she's able to bring me. So I think supervisors, because as a supervisee, there are times where I don't know exactly what I need. I'm saying all these words, and as a supervisor, I need you to filter that out with me, right? And so, what is that? Like, what's next for me? You know, And so I think that's really important as a supervisor. But I know you mentioned the agency. I think it's important if a supervisor is going to bat for their supervisees and know that there are specific resources or trainings, right? Or, hey, like I need to connect Jadine with Frank because he's doing similar work that she might be interested in, that the agency supports that work that the supervisor is trying to do for their supervisees at the end of the day.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jadine. Yeah. Other folks regarding the question of supervisors. Rosanna, go for it.
Yes, thanks. So I definitely agree. I think that it's very important for a supervisor to have the experience that you lack, because I see the supervisor's role as a nurturing role, kind of like seeing you expand, like they have this knowledge and they now need to share it with you or want to share it with you. What I look for in it, or what I feel like later on, what I was seeking in a supervisor was to be inspired. So for my supervisor to be taking action and to doing panels like this, or to be in the field as well and have the experience to then like just transmit that energy of growth, and like if I am seeking to grow, I need a supervisor who's also growing. So just movement, I feel like is something that I'm constantly seeking out in supervision.
Yeah. Yeah. Jackie, go. Did you have something to say? If not, I wanted to follow up, Rosanna. Something that might be really nice for agencies is to have a wider pool of supervisors, and to have some sort of a process for supervisees to be able to talk about some of the characteristics of a supervisor that kind of matches where they're at, matches their personalities, matches some of their needs, and figure out some sort of a system to match up with supervisors, which means that agencies may need to create more collaborative relationships between other agencies in order to make sure that those needs get met. I know Madeline had a question. I wanted to open that up to her in a minute. Any other comments or reflections on the supervision piece? Go for it, Cynthia.
I just want to say the mentorship piece has been really, really important for me, and has sort of contributed to my, I'm going to lose my voice, I'm sorry, my sort of like, staying with a community-based agency. And it's just because I'm getting a lot sort of out of the relationship. I think my supervisor really doesn't, again, sort of shy away from some really tough conversations, and also just conversations about how it's in the field, both in agency work, but also like, I've been curious about exploring elsewhere. I've been curious about policy, and being able to sort of talk that through and have someone that is just truly invested in you, not just in your productivity, but you as a clinician going out into the world.
Yeah, definitely. I want to put a pin in this particular conversation and just note that in the August Equity in the Agency Experience, we'll be talking more specifically about the supervision process. So please come back for that conversation. And as we grow this organization, this process of equity in the agency experience, hopefully we'll have more voices that join. Madeline, I know you had a question for the group, so go for it.
Hi, I'm Madeline Liebling. I represent like out in the boonies here in Greenfield, Mass. I'm out in the rural part of the state, but just a comment, at our agency, we've had a group supervision that anyone in the agency could join for about 7 or 8 years now, called Racism in the Therapeutic Encounter, and it's expanded into other areas, and it's led by a local professor, person of color from one of the local universities, facilitated by, and that's been extremely powerful for, and also other kinds of training we've had. So I feel a little, like out here in the country, we might be a little cutting edge, although it's a different population. But my question was, I've been at this agency for 16 years, and I've noticed that over this time, the agencies are DPH, mass health driven in terms of what we're supposed to be, what kind of guidelines we're supposed to be following. And over the time I've been here, we've changed like at least 3 times or more. Mass Health has come out with different guidelines and different ways you're supposed to practice and different ways you're supposed to document. And, it seems to me like the disconnect between, what interns are coming and new hires who don't, who come in, and I get it, because the clinical knowledge a person needs to learn in 2 years is phenomenally a lot, especially systemic therapy. But I find that I'm wondering how much the colleges, the universities, the training programs are actually interfacing with the state, with the DPH and with Mass Health to actually prepare. Like I believe there's coming down the pike now a whole nother big change about practicing with only evidence-based practices and documenting to that, and a whole new system of documentation. And I'm thinking, and it's a big question, and I have to jump off at one, but I'm wondering, how do the university and the academic community interface with these state agencies to prepare clinicians for the agency experience, which is about half of what you need to know is academic, and the rest is politics and forms and documenting and yada yada. So that's my question.
I would also, Madeline, just to add to that, to the professors of this group, the inverse of that question is important too. Not just how much of the universities interfacing with DPH, but also how much is DPH interfacing with the universities. So,
well, yeah, absolutely.
So,
to train.
David, Frank, Jackie, I'm curious how y'all would answer those questions.
Well, I'll take a first pass and then we'll hear from others as well. But I think that's one of the things that I think we tried to teach, is that when people talked about documentation and case conceptualization, that evidence-based practice, that I think sometimes the evidence is like 50 clients, there's the evidence, what gets published, and then what's emergent. And I think, just as you were describing, Madeline, there are things that are people doing all the time that are incredibly innovative and effective. And so going back to Chow Zhou's comment about progress, how do people document progress? If you can document progress and you can conceptualize it, I think that's incredibly effective. And that's what moves the needle as a group when people are kind of pushing back with clearly emergent evidence, emergent kind of practices that come from the system, not just come from the DSM or whatever the treatment du jour is this month.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the universities are in touch with the DMH, and so this is how it works. Usually, they're in touch with administrators, and then administrators tell us. So that's how it works. But there is an interface with the different agencies, but not always about every single change. Do you want to add to that, David? Okay.
Yeah. Frank. Oh, David, you're muted.
Really?
No, he isn't.
Oh, there you are. There you are. Say that again.
Yeah, I think it gets filtered down in terms of, as Madeline was suggesting, new guidelines, new practices, the new DSM coming out, new diagnostic conditions, all of those kind of things. And it's just a matter of, recognizing it's just a conversation. These are just people having diagnostic conversations. It isn't the truth with a capital T, it's emergent. So how do we think critically? How do we think critically to be able to say, well, I hear that, and this is what I'm recommending in this direction? How do students and clinicians kind of push back against the, everything kind of emergent towards the middle?
Right. Shall go. I'm curious about your reflections too.
Me?
Yes, go for it.
Oh, hi. My thoughts relate to Madeline and David. It's actually like, how do we have more socially just practice, basically in any corner, and related to, okay, new practice, new lens to see in agencies. I would like to see more in terms of hiring, in terms of the process of becoming a supervisor, or actively recruit people of color supervisors in agency, because a lot of agencies in Greater Boston area, now we see white management team, white supervisors, or one or two person of color supervisors, and you have people of color clinicians, graduates, and people of color clinician have to be the one that bringing up race or reflect on the families that we serve, their experiences. And as for, say, government agencies, how can we really also bring this concept of socially just practice in? I was sitting in the DCF supervisor interview, and the panel were 15, 20 white
women,
women, only 1 or 2 white men, and I am the only person of color supervisor who can sit in that panel. So, and the people in the waiting room are still all white. Like, so what's our hiring process like? And why wouldn't I sitting with it? So DCF is supposed to serve a lot of people of color families. So that's the hiring process. And
right.
Yeah.
Jackie, go for it, and then I want to.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that there aren't enough people of color in supervisory positions or clinicians. And I think one of the things that we have done at William James is try to get more clinicians, more students of color, and have we're fortunate enough to get a HRSA grant, which students can apply for. And those HRSA grants, one of the commitments that they have to make is that they have to work in a community mental health with a marginalized population for at least 5 years. So I think that we're moving towards having more of a pool of clinicians and supervisors of color, and that this is only happened because well, it hasn't happened up until now, unfortunately, and is only happening now, I think, because of what's happening in the world, and we're looking through a different lens in terms of anti-racism. And so, you know, I'm hoping, because years ago I was on a committee to bring more people of color, clinicians of color, even into our association, and there weren't any. So it really starts at, we need to train more people of color so that they can go into these positions that is so needed. So I'm hoping within the next 5 years that when you go to one of these meetings, that you're not the only person of color. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Frank, I want to hand this over to you too.
I was just gonna say, just talking a little bit about the comments that Madeline had mentioned. I think it's important as just a person doing work to know who the stakeholders are around some of these demands that maybe you have to face as a community-based worker. And I think not only as an educator, but as a supervisor, I need to make that available for the people that I am providing information to. We're change agents is something that I always sort of adhere to. And part of that has to do with knowing where the change happens. You know, rates, the rates that people have, the budget is coming out Tuesday, May 24th. And I think that we need to know when things like that are happening and let people know that are affected by things like that, because it's important for these change agents that face these sort of challenges know that they can do something about it, and put out letters to sort of advocate for things that are going to for sure affect your work.
And just thanks, Frank. And just to wrap up, I know it's 1 o'clock. I've got about a minute left, and see if I can kind of connect some of these dots here. I think that it's really, really important to bring Madeline's point to involve as many different voices as we can in these conversations. Voices from DMH, voices from DPH, Department of Public Health, DCF, people from different from different agencies, different communities, define communities however you want to define that. I think that, I think that when we talk about anti-racism work, I think that representation is part of it. I don't think that that's all that there is. I think that to anti-racism and anti-oppressive work, we've got to figure out like what are the oppressive practices built into, caked into the practice of psychotherapy, including but not limited to the DSM-5. I want to summarize this by thanking, first of all the panelists for volunteering your time, and for the folks who showed up and watched and participated in this. Thank you so much for your feedback. I'm going to stay on the call for a few more minutes once I stop recording, but please, I'm going to get the YouTube up in the next week and the MP3 of this. Please share this with people in your communities. The June 15th one, we're going to talk more about the economic systems that prevent justice from happening in the agency systems. So please come to that. So I'm going to push stop recording.